At 77, Stevie Wonder reflects on Marvin Gaye, the brother he admired, collaborated with, and mourned. Their shared deepest, darkest struggles in Motown, leaving what would define their music today. Stevie Wonder's words about Marvin Gaye. When Marvin Gaye's life was cut short on April 1, 1984, it was not just the music world that lost a legend. Stevie Wonder lost someone he regarded as family. At the funeral, Stevie stood before the crowd in tears, performing "Lighting Up the Candle," a song written just for Marvin. The moment was more than a performance. It was a farewell between two brothers bound by music and spirit. Through his grief, Stevie told mourners that Marvin was the person who encouraged him, saying the music he had within him must feel free to let it come out. That sentence revealed the depth of their connection. For Stevie, Marvin was not simply a colleague at Motown. He was the one who pushed him to be fearless, to look beyond hit records and radio formulas, and to trust in the power of truth in song. Their friendship was built on admiration as much as it was on music. Stevie saw Marvin as thoughtful, sensitive, and unafraid to put his soul into every note. Marvin, in turn, respected Stevie's extraordinary gift in the way he transformed limitations into strength. Within Motown's walls, a label that often tried to pit artists against one another, they found solidarity. Both wanted more than catchy singles. They wanted music that spoke to human struggle, to love, to justice. Even decades later, Stevie's words about Marvin are filled with tenderness. He has called What's Going On one of the bravest albums ever recorded, praising Marvin for daring to sing about war, poverty, and inequality when others stayed silent. "You can't go a day without hearing What's Going On," Stevie reflected years later, his admiration undimmed by time. For Stevie, Marvin remains a companion in spirit. When he speaks of him, it is not with gossip or scandal, but with the reverence reserved for someone who shaped his journey. Their bond was not born of rivalry, but of shared purpose. Two voices determined to stretch Motown beyond love songs, to create music that could heal, question, and inspire. Stevie's tributes over the years are reminders that though Marvin is gone, their brotherhood lives on in every note. Long before they were legends, Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye were simply young men chasing music, each carrying burdens that would shape their artistry. Their beginnings could not have been more different, yet destiny placed them under the same Motown roof, where their friendship and respect would quietly take root. Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye from their Motown beginnings. Stevie Wonder, born Stevelyn Hardaway, Judkins in Saginaw, Michigan, entered the world prematurely. Complications at birth left him blind, but his family soon discovered that his other senses seemed almost heightened. As a child, Stevie treated sound as a playground, drumming on tabletops, bending harmonicas to his will, and singing with a joy that lifted those around him. By the time he was 11, his talent was so undeniable that Berry Gordy signed him to Motown's Tamla label. Dubbed Little Stevie Wonder, the boy prodigy seemed unstoppable, a bundle of raw energy and sound who would soon astonish the world. Marvin Gaye's story carried a different weight. Born in Washington, D.C., Marvin grew up in a strict, often violent household under a domineering father. His childhood was marked by discipline that bordered on cruelty, but within the walls of his local church, he discovered solace. Singing in the choir, Marvin realized his voice was not just an escape, it was a gift. That voice carried him into doo-wop groups and, eventually, into the orbit of Motown Records, where he arrived in the early 60s. While Stevie was the boy wonder dazzling crowds, Marvin was a young man searching for direction, still wrestling with insecurity, even as his voice melted hearts. Inside Motown, life was both opportunity and constraint. Berry Gordy's hit-making machine was famously strict, with artists given carefully crafted images and songs designed to please radio. Stevie and Marvin entered this world at different stages, one as a child phenomenon, the other as a restless young singer, but both soon began to feel the walls closing in. Stevie, though grateful, longed to express more than what producers expected from a teenager. Marvin, meanwhile, yearned to move beyond the romantic ballads Motown assigned him, aching to address deeper truths that burned inside. This shared hunger for authenticity became one of the invisible threads linking them. Though their paths didn't always cross in those early years, they recognized something in one another, a refusal to settle. Stevie saw in Marvin a man unafraid to push against expectation. Marvin saw in Stevie a spirit too alive to be boxed in by age or blindness. Motown was a family in many ways, but also a battlefield of egos and ambitions. Amid the competition, Stevie and Marvin gravitated toward mutual respect instead of rivalry. Each carried different scars. Stevie from the challenges of blindness, Marvin from the wounds of a troubled home, but both believed in the power of music to heal. Looking back, it is almost poetic. Two artists shaped by hardship yet blessed with extraordinary gifts found themselves under the same roof in Detroit. Neither could have known that the bond they would forge, sometimes quiet, sometimes expressed in song, would outlast even life itself. At Motown in the 1960s, success came with a price. Berry Gordy's label was a marvel of efficiency, a hit-making machine that transformed young black artists into household names. But the very system that gave them fame also limited them. Songs were chosen for marketability, not depth. The image was curated for crossover appeal. For Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye, two men with restless souls, this structure became a cage they would not remain inside forever. Marvin's struggle came first. By the late 1960s, he was already one of Motown's brightest stars. His duets with Tammy Terrell, like Ain't No Mountain High Enough, made him beloved across the world. But behind the scenes, Marvin wrestled with despair. The sudden collapse of Tammy on stage, followed by her death in 1970, devastated him. The joy of performing love songs now felt hollow. At the same time, America itself was unraveling. The Vietnam War, civil rights struggles, inner-city poverty. Marvin felt an ache to respond, but Motown wanted him to stay the charming crooner. Stevie, though much younger, sensed a similar frustration. He had grown from a child prodigy into a young man with vision and ideas. But the label still often treated him as the boy wonder, assigning him material that didn't reflect his evolving artistry. He wanted to explore sound, to experiment with synthesizers, to speak to the world as he saw it. The old formulas no longer fit. It was Marvin who broke the wall first. In 1971, after months of clashing with Gordy, he released What's Going On, a concept album unlike anything Motown had ever allowed. Instead of love ballads, it carried songs about war, police brutality, and the cries of the poor. Gordy initially resisted, fearing it would never sell, but Marvin refused to back down. The album became a masterpiece, redefining not only Marvin's career, but the very idea of what soul music could achieve. For Stevie Wonder, Marvin's triumph was a revelation. He saw that Motown's system could be challenged, that an artist could seize creative freedom and win. Inspired, Stevie negotiated his own independence in 1971, securing a contract that gave him full control over his music. The timing could not have been more significant. He was just turning 21, legally an adult, and ready to step into his power. What followed was a golden era. Stevie entered a period of breathtaking innovation, releasing albums like Talking Book, Inner Visions, and songs in the key of life. He embraced synthesizers, layered harmonies, and complex themes, proving that popular music could be experimental and profound at once. Marvin, meanwhile, continued to push boundaries, following What's Going On with works like Let's Get It On and I Want You, blending intimacy with social consciousness. Though their sounds were distinct, Stevie often more jubilant and textured, Marvin more sensual and brooding, the spirit behind them was the same. Both men had stepped out of the assembly line to claim their voices, and in that act of courage, they saw reflections of one another. Stevie never shied away from crediting Marvin's bravery. He acknowledged that Marvin showed the way, proving that Motown could be more than a hit factory. Their journeys also highlight a deeper truth about art. Freedom is not simply the ability to create, but the responsibility to speak. Both men carried that responsibility heavily. Stevie poured it into songs like Living for the City, exposing racism and inequality. Marvin gave voice to the pain of soldiers and mothers in Mercy, Mercy Me and What's Happening, Brother. Together, they expanded the boundaries of the soul, transforming it from entertainment into testimony. Looking back, their parallel rebellions seem less like coincidence and more like destiny. Two friends, shaped by hardship, rose against the currents of an industry that sought to contain them. Their victories were not just personal, but collective. Every black artist who followed at Motown and beyond walked through the doors Stevie and Marvin had forced open, And though their paths would later diverge, this moment in history sealed their bond forever. Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye were no longer simply stars on the Motown roster. They had become voices of a generation, prophets in song, daring to tell the truth when silence would have been easier. The 1971 became a decade of miracles for Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye. It was the period when both men, free from the restraints of Motown's rigid system, stepped fully into themselves. No longer just singers, they became visionaries, artists who shaped the very sound of a generation. And though their music often moved in different directions, their impact ran side by side, like two mighty rivers flowing toward the same ocean, the beginning of their success. For Stevie Wonder, this was the era that transformed him from prodigy to prophet. His 1972 album Talking Book stunned audiences with its maturity. Songs like Superstition and You Are the Sunshine of My Life weren't just hits. They were sonic revolutions. Stevie's embrace of the synthesizer, particularly the groundbreaking Tonto system, pushed soul music into the future. He was no longer following the times, he was creating them. And Stevie didn't stop there. Albums came in a flood, each one richer than the last. Inner Visions was a masterpiece of social consciousness, tackling drug abuse, systemic racism, and political corruption. Fulfilling this first finale, 1974 offered introspection, while Songs in the Key of Life. 1976 was his magnum opus, a sprawling double album that captured the joy and sorrow of humanity itself. Tracks like Love's in Need of Love, Today and Isn't She Lovely revealed both his heart for justice and his tenderness as a father. Critics hailed it as one of the greatest albums ever made, and history has only confirmed that verdict. Marvin Gaye, meanwhile, charted his own extraordinary course. After the groundbreaking success of What's Going On, he pivoted in 1973 to something more essential but no less daring. Let's Get It On. Far from being just a bedroom anthem, it was Marvin's meditation on desire as something spiritual and healing. His silky falsetto turned vulnerability into power, and the album became a cultural phenomenon. Where Stevie's music reached toward the heavens, Marvin's reached into the deepest corners of the human heart. But Marvin was never content to repeat himself. In 1976, he released I Want You, a lush textured record that expanded the language of soul with layered arrangements and raw intimacy. Then came Here, My Dear 1978, an album born from his painful divorce from Anna Gordy, Berry Gordy's sister. What could have been just a bitter obligation became a brutally honest diary set to music. While misunderstood at the time, it has since been hailed as one of the most courageous personal statements in popular music. Together, Stevie and Marvin represented two halves of a whole. Stevie's music carried optimism and the belief in a brighter tomorrow. Marvin's music exposed longing, doubt, and the hunger for love and connection. One radiated sunlight, the other revealed the shadows. And yet, they were not opposites. They were reflections of the same truth, that black artistry could contain the full spectrum of human experience. Their parallel greatness also meant that the 1970s belonged to them as much as to anyone. Each time Stevie released a record that pushed the boundaries of sound, Marvin answered with one that pushed the boundaries of emotion. They didn't compete in the way Motown executives might have liked. Instead, they lifted one another. When Stevie heard What's Going On, he knew he could speak more boldly about society. When Marvin listened to Songs in the Key of Life, he knew the possibilities of music had stretched even further. The public, too, felt their combined impact. In a time of political upheaval, racial struggle, and cultural change, Stevie and Marvin provided not just soundtracks, but guidance. Their songs became healing spaces, rallying cries, and love letters all at once. Fans didn't just dance to their music, they leaned on it. By the end of the decade, both men stood as towering figures. Stevie Wonder had become a symbol of hope, winning multiple Grammys and earning respect as an innovator beyond category. Marvin Gaye had become the very embodiment of soul, his voice a reminder of how fragile and resilient the human spirit can be. In the 1970s, they weren't just artists at Motown. They were artists who transcended Motown, reshaping popular music itself. Side by side, Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye carried soul into new territory, proving that when freedom and courage meet talent, the result is timeless. Behind the glow of success in the 70s, both Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye faced private storms that shaped the men they became. Fame magnified their triumphs, but it also magnified their pain. And yet, through hardship, their brotherhood never wavered. One man's struggle was met with the other's empathy, and their bond deepened with time. Their personal struggles. For Stevie Wonder, the pressure of constant creation was immense. By the mid-70s, he had poured himself into album after album, each one hailed as genius. But genius often comes at a cost. The relentless touring and recording took a toll on his health. In August 1973, Stevie's life nearly ended when a car accident left him in a coma for 4 days. Fans held their breath, fearing the world might lose him at just 23. When he awoke, his sense of mission only grew stronger, as if he had been given a second chance. He spoke often of faith, of God's hand in his survival, and of the need to use his gift with even more purpose. Marvin Gaye was among those shaken by the news, a reminder of how fragile even the brightest lights could be. Marvin's struggles, meanwhile, were darker and more enduring. Despite his success, he battled depression, anxiety, and drug addiction. The weight of his troubled upbringing never left him. His relationships were turbulent, and financial problems compounded his personal pain. By the late 70s, Marvin was spiraling. He left Motown and exiled himself to Europe for a time, trying to outrun his demons. His brilliance on stage and in the studio was never in question, but inside, he was a man at war with himself. Through these ups and downs, Stevie remained a consistent voice of love and admiration for Marvin. Unlike others who distanced themselves when Marvin's struggles became public, Stevie chose compassion. He never spoke ill of him, never reduced him to his troubles. Instead, he continued to call Marvin a brother, a genius, and a soul whose influence would last forever. Their connection wasn't one of constant collaboration. In fact, they rarely recorded together. It was something deeper, rooted in mutual recognition. Stevie understood Marvin's fragility because he too had faced moments when life tested him. Marvin respected Stevie's courage, the way he carried himself with grace despite challenges of his own. Their bond wasn't always loud or visible, but it was real, a current flowing quietly beneath their careers. Tragically, Marvin's personal battles ended in heartbreak. On April 1st, 1984, the world was stunned by the news that Marvin Gaye had been shot and killed by his own father, just 1 day before his 45th birthday. For Stevie Wonder, the loss was crushing. He attended Marvin's funeral and sang with tears in his voice, offering the song "Lighting Up the Candle" as a farewell. His words to mourners were simple, but piercing. It was more than a tribute. It was an acknowledgement that Marvin's courage had shaped Stevie's own path. His grief was not just for a fellow artist, but for a man who had been a guide, a companion, a brother. Even decades later, Stevie still speaks of Marvin with reverence. He calls him a visionary, a man who gave everything of himself, sometimes too much, in pursuit of truth in music. And in those reflections, it is clear that their bond endures. Marvin's voice may have been silenced, but in Stevie's heart, and in the music of generations that followed, it still sings. Their friendship, though often quiet, remains one of the most powerful threads in Motown's history, a story of two men who carried each other, inspired each other, and left behind not just songs, but a shared legacy of courage, love, and brotherhood. Legacies are not built on chart positions or trophies. They are built on the way music lingers, the way songs outlive the men who sang them. Their legacies. For Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye, legacy is not just history, it is alive, present, and woven into the culture of today. Their voices may belong to the past, but their impact stretches endlessly into the future. Marvin Gaye's What's Going On remains one of the most revered albums in the history of recorded music. More than 50 years after its release, it still feels urgent, still feels necessary. Lines about war, police violence, environmental decay, and cries for justice sound as if they were written yesterday. When modern artists from Kendrick Lamar to J. Cole craft socially conscious albums, Marvin's shadow is there, guiding them. His work proved that soul music could be political without losing its intimacy, and in doing so, he gave permission to generations of musicians to merge art with activism. His other records, too, continue to breathe life into the present. Let's Get It On and Sexual Healing reshaped the language of intimacy in popular music, influencing R&B singers from D'Angelo to Usher. Marvin's vulnerability, his willingness to lay bare both desire and despair, made space for men in music to express emotions that had often been suppressed. His falsetto became a blueprint for modern soul, echoing in the voices of artists like Maxwell, Frank Ocean, and The Weeknd. Marvin's gift was to remind us that love, whether sensual or spiritual, is as worthy a subject as protest. Stevie Wonder's legacy, meanwhile, is perhaps even more sprawling. His innovations in sound, particularly his pioneering use of synthesizers, shaped not just soul, but pop, funk, and electronic music. Without Stevie, the sonic landscapes of artists like Prince or Daft Punk would sound entirely different. Songs such as Superstition and Higher Ground have become cornerstones of funk and rock alike, sampled and reimagined endlessly across genres. His album Songs in the Key of Life is studied as a masterpiece, its wide range of topics, from parenthood to poverty to love, offering a panoramic view of the human experience. Yet Stevie's impact cannot be measured by music alone. He became a powerful activist, using his fame to champion causes that mattered deeply to him. Perhaps his most famous political effort was his tireless campaign to establish Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a national holiday in the United States. For years, Stevie advocated, marched, and rallied, even writing the anthem Happy Birthday as a tribute to Dr. King's legacy. His persistence paid off when the holiday was finally signed into law in 1983. Through his actions, Stevie reminded the world that music is not separate from life. It is a tool for justice, unity, and healing. Together, Stevie and Marvin's legacies form a dialogue that continues to inspire. Where Marvin laid bare the pains and passions of the soul, Stevie radiated optimism and faith. Where Marvin questioned the state of the world, Stevie offered hope for what it could become. The balance of their voices created a fuller picture of humanity, one that still resonates in today's fractured world. Their bond also lives on in the way they are remembered together. At tributes, documentaries, and award ceremonies, their names often surface side by side, as if history itself refuses to separate them. Stevie has kept Marvin's memory alive with grace, recalling him not for his struggles, but for his brilliance and courage. Each time Stevie speaks Marvin's name, it is an act of preservation, a reminder that the man who once encouraged him still stands beside him in spirit. Modern music owes both men an unpayable debt. Artists today have freedoms Marvin and Stevie had to fight for: creative control, the ability to speak truth to power, the courage to blend personal pain with social commentary. The idea that an album can be both commercially successful and artistically daring is now taken for granted, but it was hard-won in the battles these two waged against Motown's machine. Beyond music, their legacies live in the hearts of listeners. Families still play Isn't She Lovely at baby showers, still slow dance to Let's Get It On at weddings, still cry when What's Going On plays against images of injustice. These songs are not relics of the past, they are part of the fabric of human experience. Generations not yet born when Marvin died or when Stevie first rose to fame continue to find themselves in these melodies. And perhaps that is the truest measure of their legacy: longevity rooted in relevance. Some artists fade with time, their songs tied too tightly to one era. Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye transcend time. Their music is as alive now as it was when first recorded, not because of nostalgia, but because it continues to tell the truth about love, about struggle, about the hope that tomorrow can be better. When Stevie, at 77, still speaks of Marvin Gaye, his words carry more than memory. They carry testimony. He is not just reminiscing about a friend long gone, he is affirming that Marvin's spirit endures, that his voice still matters, that the bond they shared continues to shape music and culture. Together, they remind us that while life is fleeting, art, when it is honest and fearless, is eternal.